series, and it's called Do You Hear Me? It has been going on for weeks now, and it's just so important to be able to hear each and every voice that is in our community. And I'm happy, so excited to do today's series because it focuses on the Latino community, the Latinx community, and we are incredibly diverse. And I think that's always such an important point to make because we come from so many different countries, Spanish speaking, some are bilingual, some are English speaking only. Just the diversity within the Latino community is something that we should discuss. And today we're going to discuss it as how it relates to Chicago and the Chicago area and how so many different groups were actually able to migrate here and become part of this community, build this community, I think is a great way of putting it too. And we have people who are joining us on the panel today, as I look down my Zoom list, that are living history. Like their stories, we're going to dive into some of these personal stories, which I think makes it so exciting and so personal for all of you out there. So one by one, and why don't you just go ahead and say a couple words as a hello as we get started around the room. I'm going to introduce you one by one. And the first person I would like to introduce is Carlos Tortolero. He is with founder and president of the National Museum of Mexican Art in Chicago. He founded that museum back in 1982. It is an absolute gem in the Pilsen community. If you haven't been there, this is a trip that you need to make. And one of the interesting parts that I saw here too, on your bio, Carlos, is you were nearly 3 years old growing up on the near west side, right at Taylor and Bishop. That is a true Chicagoan, listing the intersection there. So Carlos, please say a few words to everyone and introduce yourself as well.
Hi, it's great to be here. I'm very happy to be here. You know, my family came from Mexico when I was almost 3, and we came from Guadalajara, which is one of the best climates in the world, right? We came in a blizzard in January. And my mother said it was an old car. There was 4 of us in the car with my mother and dad, so 6 of us in an old car. And my mother says that in the floor of the car by her, where she was sitting, right, there was a little hole. She could see the snow, you know, and she told my father, "What are you bringing us to? Imagine one of the best climates of the world, and you're coming here in a blizzard." It was a blizzard. So she was freaking all out. But, you know, all finally story ended well. So I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very glad to be part of Chicago, and I'm very happy to be with all you people. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Carlos. And we are going to dive into that personal story because clearly there's something that brought you in that car with the hole in the floorboard there all the way here. So welcome, welcome. Next we have Maria Bacilli, civic and philanthropic leader in Chicago, created one of the first public relations and marketing agencies to identify and reach Hispanic consumers in Chicago. So she has been incredibly active in giving, and pretty much giving some more, it seems like. So I don't want to be, I know you're going to be humble about this. So if you're significant, just not only in the government and in giving and all the commission on Chicago Landmark, Chicago Tourism Council, the list goes on and on here, Maria. But what I love most is your experience too, being born and native Cuban and making your way to Chicago as well. So I want to thank you and welcome you for being on our panel today too.
Thank you, Stacy. I'm delighted to be with everyone telling our stories, as you call them, our living history. I came to Chicago as a young girl at the age of 12 after the Cuban Revolution. And I had to chuckle when Carlos was talking about the climate because look, today I'm trying to emulate myself being on a beach in Cuba. I grew up in a beautiful tropical island with not only incredible beauty in terms of its landscape, but you know, with a very interesting history and great culture. And so I remember my first winter in Chicago having the same feelings as Carlos's mom. But Chicago has been a wonderful, welcoming city to many immigrants through the history of the city, really. And I think Cubans, as well as Mexicans and Puerto Ricans, although Puerto Ricans are not immigrants, and Central Americans and Latin Americans would tell similar stories of what a welcoming city Chicago has been to all of us.
Maria, thank you. And I love the spirit of your virtual background too. We all want to go there. Let me click on our beach, right? Exactly. All right. Billy Ocasio, hello there. So glad to have you as well. And was executive director of the National Museum of Puerto Rican Arts and Culture. 2013 became president, CEO, raising over $10 million to restore, renovate. Beautiful out there. Been out there as well. This is located in the Humboldt Park Stables building. If you haven't had a chance to visit, I can't say enough about going and visiting these different communities and seeing what's available. Billy, I just want to talk about your experience as well eventually, but welcome, and the Puerto Rican experience too. So critical, so part of the Chicago fabric.
Well, thank you. And before I get into this, let me just ask Maria a question. Maria, are you having a Cuba Libre out there?
You know what? I should. When all of this is over, let's get together and have a
All
good
right.
time. That's a
Well,
good idea.
listen, no, let me first of all thanks ABC7, Stacy and Diana. Thank you all for inviting us. You know, it's so good. I'm so glad to be part of this panel with Maria and Carlos and Patty. You know, just our community, our Latino community is made up of so many different cultures, but we all come together. We all support each other. And so thank you for doing this. As far as me, both of my parents came from Ciales, Puerto Rico. They came here. Well, Puerto Rican started to arrive in Chicago in the late 40s, but in the early 50s is when they really started to migrate here. And a lot of them came here to work in the pipelines, the steel mills, and those sorts of things. Came here to live in Lincoln Park, and Lincoln Park got gentrified, and we all got pushed to Humboldt Park, where we expect to stay. So I was born at a hospital in Humboldt Park off of Division Street, Norwegian American Hospital. I'm now the chairman of the board there. But you know, Humboldt Park has been home to our Puerto Rican community, and you know, and we've worked with so many different communities there. So, but that's where we're at.
Thank you, Billy. Can't wait to hear more about your story as well. So all kinds of personal stories that kind of like really showcase what's happening. So the last person on our panel is Patricia Massa Pittsford. And I'm so grateful that you are here as well, because we hear a lot, well, at least I do, at least in the community. It's the Mexican experience, the Puerto Rican experience. I've heard a lot about the Cuban experience, the Central American experience of coming to Chicago. How critical, how important is that? Just like all the rest of them. So Patricia was born in San Salvador, El Salvador, grew up in El Salvador as well, but spent some of her time, her formative years in Switzerland. Really want to fast forward to as well, your service for the country was part of El Salvador's foreign service for 24 years as the Consul General of El Salvador in New York, and in 2001 was transferred in that same capacity to the Consulate General of El Salvador in Chicago until February of this year. So you have really kind of had a front row seat to the diplomacy of all this too. Interested to hear your story as well. So welcome, Patricia.
Thank you, Stacy. Thank you for ABC Channel 7 for this series of Do You Hear Me? It's very important to hear, and I'm very, honored to be among the panel of these tropical birds. You know, I call myself a tropical bird. You know, it's like I'm waiting and, going back. I came in a professional capacity here in Chicago with my family, and we actually came because my husband was offered a job, and we were living in New York for 15 years. So, you know, before I considered New York my second home, but I think it's that second home. I left Chicago as my first city. I love living in Chicago. I'm very grateful to all the people that have welcomed me, not only professionally, but personally. I left the foreign service. I'm gonna remain here because I have a bicultural, not only a bilingual family, but a bicultural family. Most of my family lives in El Salvador. It's pretty much in here, my husband and I. And I will try to talk about the Central American experience, even though I'm from El Salvador. But in what I like of Chicago, that this really represents like a melting pot. You know, I can feel at home being like in Humboldt Park, eating arroz con gandules, or pork, or Cuban food, and la villita, pilsen. It's and Salvadorians have pretty much, and Central Americans have become one community. It's developed like a common language, and they still need so much from every one of us to support them, and especially the new generation to be at the place that they deserve to be. This is, I think we're gonna leave nationalities and backgrounds behind, but it's the Latin community that deserves, not only, in my position as consul general, I was very humbled to see, the struggles that the people have endured coming to the United States and having established and worked hard and be productive people, but there's so much more that can be done. So, I welcome this type of conversation, because I think we can share experiences, because as any other immigrant community, it's the ones that are in the position to help them. It's they're very deserving, and we need to lend helping hand in whatever possible way we can.
Yes.
Patricia, on that note, I just want to take a minute to acknowledge too that the Latino community and how hard hit it has been by COVID, I think is an important topic. And I just really want to acknowledge that and put that out there, because we make up like 30% of the population. We have more than 45% of the cases. And you're speaking to that, about to the struggle, what so many Latinos go through and experience too. Yeah, it's funny. I love this. We always have like the Zoom challenges, right? I'm glad I'm not on mute. Sometimes that happens too. So let's go ahead. I guess, having you throw that out there right out of the gate, I mean, it makes me want to kind of mix up the rotation, but why don't we start off kind of with the history and each community's experience as we go through this. And I know I'm going to be asking a lot of you, like obviously tons of countries in Central America, to the best of your ability too. But Carlos, why don't we go ahead and start with you about the Mexican experience and migration. And I kind of want to hold off on your personal story, because I want to save that for a whole section of its own. So on the Mexican migration to the Chicago area.
What's interesting is you can read a book about, Mexicanos in the United States. They don't mention us in Chicago. They really don't. It's like, where did the diaspora that people forgot about? It's so interesting. The Texas area, Southwest, your western part of Mexico, the United States gets talked about. But we remind people that we didn't cross the border crossed us. It's a very important thing to remember. And in California, the fact that people don't understand or know about is that Los Angeles was founded primarily by a group of Afro people from Mexico, okay? So they had African heritage. And that's been forgotten. I don't understand why they don't talk about them more. Chicago's a different story. Chicago, if one looks at, at censuses of the late 1800s, you find a couple of us here and there in these censuses. But in 1892, for the World's Fair.
You know what? Hold on one second, Carlos. When Maria comes back, I'm going to probably mute myself too, because I have the potential of having a distraction in my own house. So why don't we everyone just join me, and we could all kind of mute while Carlos is talking, and I'm going to do it myself. So remind me, please, if I don't unmute myself.
So anyway, in 1892, for the World's Fair in Chicago, this great painter from Mexico, one of the best painters of all time, came for the World's Fair, and he wrote in his diary that guess what he was eating in Chicago? He bought from a vendor, tamales. So in 1892, there was somebody from Mexico who was selling tamales here. That's a great story. And then, the years went by, the revolution comes in 1910, a lot of people came, but it's really more in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and boom, it just took off big time. The favorite stories is Our Lady of Guadalupe Church began in a boxcar. And the two ways that our community came to Chicago was as farm workers, sugar beet, like, going up and just picking crops, going from Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, moving your way north, and trains and railroad trains. So it's kind of interesting where the first Catholic Church in Chicago actually started in a boxcar. That's how key the railroads were to America. And I met a woman who was actually born in a boxcar. So it just shows you how, and that was like, the 1910s, the 1920s, the 1930s. And the first neighborhood was South Chicago. South Chicago is the first urban community, of our community, in Chicago, easily. Then it's the UIC area, but that's been gentrified a long time ago. And then it became back to the yards. Pilsen is new in history compared to these other three places. But but really the number one reason why people come and always come for primarily is jobs. Politics will make a part of it, but it's about the jobs. I mean, if people can earn half the money that they make in the United States and stay in Mexico, they would stay in Mexico in a heartbeat, I believe. It's jobs what brings us here to the United States.
Okay, Carlos, that raises an interesting question. And I encourage, if you guys have questions as well, you want to hop on in, feel free to. Like, it could be more of a conversation than me kind of just sitting here going around the room. So, but you're raising an interesting point. So you're talking about jobs. Forgive my ignorance on history here, but what industries were really drawing people? Is it mostly, you mentioned the farm workers, but like, was it I think of the cattle,
The stockyards.
Thank you.
No, but in our community, it was mainly factories and warehouses. Nowadays, when you drive around Chicago, majority of them are gone. But as a child, I remember factories. My dad worked at Hot Point for factories his whole life in Chicago. So a lot, CNIF was big. I mean, all the appliances, stoves, refrigerators, everything was being made in Chicago at one time. Those are the jobs. And of course, the steel mills, which was probably the best paying jobs by far on the southeast side of Chicago. But the working factories, primarily the first ones who came over.
I love the tamale story at the World Fair.
I know that blew me away when I found out. Who would have thought? I was shocked too. 1892. 1892.
That is awesome. I love that. Thank you very much, Carlos. Appreciate that insight into the Mexican immigration. Maria, you want to jump in here now with
Absolutely, Stacy. Thank
Cuban
you.
experience?
I want to comment too on Carlos's narrative about all the factory jobs that were in Chicago, and that's one of the reasons that so many immigrants were attracted to Chicago. And at one point during the 60s, there were companies like Motorola that provided transportation from the city to their suburban locations. So Latinos would gather, because I had family members who would go to an area in the city and they would be picked up by a Motorola van that would take them to the suburbs to work. So, Latinos have proven to be, like other immigrants, very hardworking, very willing to take any job, because the reason they've come to the United States, right? It's looking for better economic opportunities. And this is why we've become the greatest economy in the world, because it has been constantly for centuries fueled by cheap labor. And really, it's the history of all of us who live in the United States, except for the native population. But anyway, the Cubans began to come to Chicago in the 50s, some of them for economic reasons, but the majority of them because they were fleeing the dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista, who was in power till 1959, when he fled the country, taking with him millions of dollars. And many of the Cubans that were in Chicago, some of them, there weren't many, maybe I've read as many, maybe 2,500 Cubans at that time lived in Chicago. Some of them went back to Cuba, but many of them, if not most of them, came back after the Cuban Revolution didn't become what most middle class Cubans thought it would be, which would be having a democratic system of government and a different kind of governmental system that would allow for some of the liberties that, of course, are available in other democracies. So The bulk of the Cubans came to Chicago between 1960 and 1962. There were over 25,000 who came to Chicago, and they were all political refugees. They came because they thought that their lives were in danger in Cuba, either because they were outspoken, like one of my uncles who ended up in prison for a number of years, or they were just afraid that the life that they had known would change so drastically that they didn't want to be part of that. I came in 1961 as the Peter Pan. The Peter Pan operation was a State Department backed, organized operation that brought 14,000 Cuban children to the United States without their parents. So we came unaccompanied by any adult. We were placed in foster homes. Chicago ended up being one of those cities that could take all these children because it was a Catholic church that worked hand in hand with the State Department to place these children in foster homes around the United States. So there was a priest in Miami who was able to sign a visa waiver, if you can believe it. I think it's the first time in the history of the State Department that a non-State Department employee was able to say that Maria Concepcion de Chile Carreño, which was my legal in Cuba, could come to the United States and she doesn't need a visa. So I came with a little piece of paper. It said that I had a visa waiver and I could be allowed into the United States. I came with my two brothers. We lived in Miami for a while until a foster home was found in Chicago. And again, why Chicago? Because Chicago had a very robust Catholic archdiocese that had a very big agency called Catholic Charities that could place and supervise all these children in foster homes. There were other children other than Roman Catholic, but the bulk of us were raised as Roman Catholic. There were some Protestant children. Catholic Charities made sure that those children went to Protestant homes. There were some Jewish children. Catholic Charities made sure those children went to Jewish foster homes. So we were all placed in homes in the Chicagoland area. And I was separated from my parents for almost 2 years. And my parents never thought that they would join us in the United States. They thought that there would be a change in the government in Cuba, and therefore we would all be able to go back to Cuba. But of course, no, the exile community has been in the United States over 60 years. So at the height of the community, there were about 50,000 Cubans living in Chicago. I think right now it's under 20,000. Many have not only just moved to the suburbs, but actually have gone to warmer climate like Miami in Southeast Florida.
Right.
We can all understand.
That's that. We're going to talk more about your story because as soon as I round the corner, am I still muted? No. Okay. Because the one question I have before I move on is, how old were you?
I was 12 years old.
You're 12.
I was the middle child. My younger brother was 10. My older brother was 15. You know, all of us who are Peter Pans or Pedro Pans, that's how the operation was called, recall our parents telling us the same thing. We're going to be separated for a while, but we'll see you back in Cuba because this is going to change. The US government is not going to allow the Soviet satellite to exist within 90 miles of its borders. And so we all really thought that the separation was a temporary one. And you know, there's so many stories. You know, the members of the Peter Pan group run the gamut. You know, from U.S. senators to writers to people who just lost their way in life because it was a very traumatic experience for all of us. And how we handled it, I think it's called resilience, which is something that many of us have and others are not privy to that. And so, because it was very tough being in a home, not knowing when you'd see your parents again, with people you had never met before, speaking in a language I didn't know. I would have been happier in a Mexican home. Carlos, too bad we didn't know each other. Your parents could have been my foster parents. I would have been
add something about Maria's experience because last year a play came out called Havana, Madrid, about 6 Latino immigrants. Maria's story is part of that play. It's a great play called Havana Madrid by Teatro Vista, and Maria's story is featured. It's a great play, but Maria's part is so beautiful. It's a good story, Maria. Great story.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Maria, thank you. Yeah, we're going to get to more of that too. Billy, I want to just give you a chance to talk about Puerto Ricans and moving on here to Chicago. Like, tell us about their experience.
So let me, yes, thank you. Let me just start by saying we started arriving here in the late 40s, but in the 50s is really when the migration took place. Most of the Puerto Ricans came here and they came to Lincoln Park. Lincoln Park High School was known as Waller High School before, or the Puerto Rican High School, and so that's where we basically came. But then there was a lot of gentrification that was taking place, and so we ended up moving to Humboldt Park. Humboldt Park was really a nightmare for the Puerto Rican people because the people who owned the buildings there didn't want to be there anymore. They were renting to us, but they didn't really care about us. And so they started what you call arson for hire. And so if you go on the corner of Washtenaw and Lemoyne, you'll see one of the oldest murals and one of the first murals of our community. And you'll see a mother and her child screaming out a window with fire behind them because they would set these buildings on fire while people were still living in them. So this mural is kind of a reminder of what our past was like moving into this community of Humboldt Park. But we made the most of what we could in Humboldt Park. We had to do a few riots in order to make things happen, but people responded. And so we had the 66 riot and the 70s riot. We did those things, but finally the city started to take notice and we started to take notice. We knew that they weren't going to do much for us, so we had to step up our game. And so we moved to different areas. I think that the majority of our parents came here and they started to work at the pipeline factory in the suburbs in Franklin Park. They worked at the steel mills. As Carlos mentioned before, Motorola was one of the big companies. And CNF used to be right there on Division in Damon. And that's where we had actually our first theater that's no longer there. The San Juan Theater was there. But we basically learned to kind of pick ourselves up and move forward. And so, decades later, we had a lot of elected officials that came forward. We had a lot of business people who came forward. We created in 1993, Division Street was still was still coming together. But on Division Street, there was an 83% vacancy rate of all the storefronts on there. That's when we decided to put up the big monumental flags, the biggest flags in the world, the Puerto Rican flags. And within 5 years, we went from an 83% vacancy rate to 76% occupancy rate with the buildings and the businesses being owned by Puerto Rican community. It was a huge success for our community. I remember the governor at the time of Puerto Rico coming in and saying, every Puerto Rican needs to do a Mecca to Chicago to figure out how to build a Puerto Rican community. And so we just kept moving from that point forward. We did the flags, we did Paso Boricua, we've done schools, and we've done all these other things. And now, most recently, our biggest accomplishment to anchor all of that was the National Puerto Rican Museum. So we've been in the area for quite some time, but we've had a lot of help. I've learned from the Mexican Fine Arts Museum and Carlos how to move things forward. I've learned from the Cuban business community. I remember that when I first became an alderman, that one of the first streets that I renamed was Milwaukee Avenue. I renamed it after Jose Marti because the Cuban business people embraced me and they taught us a lot about how to move a community forward. And so, I basically owe a lot of what we've done in this community to a lot of other cultures. The Central American community, they've always come together. I don't know, for decades, they've come together to celebrate Central America. And I've been invited to so many of their events and stuff. So, I think that although we're a Puerto Rico community, it's because of the other communities that have helped us get to where we're at.
That is an incredible acknowledgement. I appreciate you even speaking up and talking about that, because I think that's important to the embracing of each other as opposed to, division or what have you. So just hearing that is fabulous. And Patricia, I'm looking at my map here. So I'm like, El Salvador, I'm gonna have you like, go where you want on this one because there's so many countries involved: Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, Belize, Guatemala. I mean, like on and on here, right? So like, share with us, if you will, what you want about the Central American experience.
Well, you know, it's human nature to migrate. So immigration for Central American has been happening. There was an event that really put Chicago on the map for the rest of Latin America. That was in 1959, that the Pan American Games were held here in Chicago. So a lot of intellectuals and young professionals, that was the kind of the first wave of immigration, saw Chicago as a possibility instead of the East Coast, because it had like great academic institutions to look for education for professionals, about like the economies, the Chicago boys, and all these. So it kind of put Chicago in the map for intellectuals. But later on in the 70s and 80s, there was, because of the political unrest in Central America that had to do a lot with U.S. foreign policy with regards to Central America, and that was kind of like a domino effect from what happened in Cuba. It's the dictator Somoza in Nicaragua was ousted, and there's Nicaraguans and Salvadorians started to look the North as place to look for political asylum. Traditionally, it was LA, naturally because of the weather, California, New York, and in some cases for Salvadorians, Washington, and for Guatemalans mostly, Chicago, especially for indigenous population, looked to Chicago, and the reason for that was that Chicago has been very charitable. The Catholic Church, it's the Loyola, the Jesuit tradition, other religious institutions, organizations like Harlan Alliance, and it's the University of Chicago with its Center for the treatment of victims of torture. So it was like a magnet. It was a magnet in that time from these refugees. One of the centers that I really tried to support as a board member, Centro Romero, was founded by a lot of Salvadorians, and it was pretty much to service the Central American community. Now Centro Romero, and it was named after Archbishop Romero, now a saint, and it was to support those people looking for political asylum, those who are political refugees. That's when the temporary protected status was kind of, that legislation came. So it left immigrants like in the limbo that, it's like, okay, we know that you're in a hard place, but we're not going to give you political asylum. We're going to leave you in this limbo of temporary protected status, which is still a limbo. But most of the Nicaraguans were able to, through legislation known as NACARA, were able to adjust status. And, the political unrest changed into afterward in the 90s as, still a magnet for immigrants because of economical issues, and we face, all Central America, we face a problem with gangs. It's very insecure, but that it's been kind of like an effect of like a post-war community where it's most vulnerable, where you have to like invest the most to kind of rehab that society used to violence. Instead, instead of seeing the Canadian, um, you know, immigration of Central Americans, where they were giving all the pretty much all the resources to become part of the community. In the United States, in a lot of places, these communities were marginalized. This is why they still keep doing the jobs that service, agricultural, factory workers, without giving the resources and the privileges of education, of health. So, and the biggest problem that we have still in Central America is young democracies that have very weak institutions and and a lot of corruption. So it's kind of like it's like a never-ending cycle.
Right.
So naturally, immigration is going to continue, and especially when we have like a country like El Salvador, a country of 7 million people, mostly like 2 million people live in the States. So it's a magnet, you go to Waukegan and you find a lot of Hondurans. You go to Bensonville and it's filled with Guatemalans, and pretty much all Central America, it's been we've most of us have the same, we share the same history from colonial times, and we keep sharing the same history, especially what we call the Northern Triangle, which is Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. We all know the history of Nicaragua, that got rid of a dictator to get a worse one, but in Nicaragua, the immigration has gone a lot to Costa Rica, which is, Costa Rica is pretty much an example of that we will all like to follow. It definitely has its flaws, but it's an example that what can be done when it's where the investment is done the right way and in the right institutions. And we're very, with regards to our traditions, to our likes, dislikes, were very, very, very homogeneous.
Right. It's very interesting to talk about the immigration aspect, the migration aspect of all of it too. I want to kind of dive into that, but I promised wanting to hear some of your personal stories too. So like, I'm looking at the clock saying we have 20 minutes. I would like to hear the highlights of all your personal stories, if we could get that in, but I also want to kind of like open it up to a discussion at the end here for the last 10 minutes and just talk about our contributions and moving forward with it, and like letting you guys just free flow it, if you will. So after you share, I'm going to give us like 5 minutes, if that's okay, to kind of like everyone share their own, because Carlos, I got to hear more about this car trip. I mean, obviously the whole idea of the family packing it up in the car and the snow on the ground and seeing that. I mean, those are journeys. Those are journeys families are making, right? And I mean, it's even speaks to modern day almost too, just the continual journey that so many of these families are going through. So please go for it.
My favorite childhood story involves, of all things, romper room. I don't know if people remember Romper Room, but there was a woman who had a mirror, then some smoke. I mean, this is back, back in black and white days. Smoke will come out, and then, there's no more mirror. And she'll say, I see Bobby and Frankie and Mary go, Carlos, 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 and Carlos, Carlos. And every day, and I'll tell my mother, Mama, they never say anybody named Juan Maria. Most of my friends are named Juan and Maria. I mean, don't they find these people? So as a little kid, I could see, this is a country we have problems with. So very early on, one had to see, wow, this is gonna be a problem. And we have parents who insisted that we're gonna go to college. A lot of my friends, didn't even go to high school, didn't even graduate from high school, but we knew we were all gonna go to college. And that's why I always tell people, the fact that you go to school is such a key component, and we cannot emphasize that enough. That and voting are two things that are really, really important for our community. But I still, to this day, I'm sometimes walking around absent-minded, and I think of Robert saying, maybe she calls my name now.
That's funny. Yeah, you can hear your name now, though. Don't you feel that way, Carlos? Like, yeah, I love it.
Yes, that's better. Yes, yes. I love my name. It's a good name. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, like, I love that part of Chicago too. Maria, you were talking about your childhood experience. I guess what would be, what's your biggest takeaway from that, being part of that Peter Pan group, that you think resonates now or is helpful now for all of us to hear?
Well, we Cubans have always called ourselves the Golden Refugees because we were allowed to come into the United States without any type of documentation. I think I mentioned earlier that I came to the United States with a visa waiver signed by a Catholic priest in the city of Miami. But the context of that period is that during the 1950s and 60s until the 80s, until the fall of the Soviet Union, anyone who applied for political refugee status from a country that was a communist country would pretty much be automatically be granted political asylum, and Cubans came into that category. Of course, what is going right now, what's going on in the world is absolutely heartbreaking. We know that since World War II, we now have the largest number of refugees in the world roaming around with no place to go. And most countries are not welcoming them, and they live in the most deplorable conditions. And it's a very sad story to me personally. We recently read about the awful, awful accident in Greece, where there was a refugee camp that caught on fire, and it's just, I can barely read the news about that, because to me it's very personal. I mean, to me, as a 12-year-old living in a foster home with a family that I really didn't understand what they were really saying to me, and I couldn't quite express how sad and scared I was probably the saddest, most challenging time in my life. But I did have a roof over my head. I could see other Cuban Peter Pans from time to time when Catholic Charities gathered us together. There were about 200 of us in the Chicago metro area, mostly in the northern suburbs, by the way, of Chicago. I was in Lincolnwood and in Evanston. There was a big community in Wilmette and Winnetka. But, my story really is a happy one compared to what's going on, even though at the time it was a very difficult period in my life. I think I was lucky. I was able to find people who were sympathetic and loving and heard my story. I think that that's not the case that's going on in the world right now. Most of these children are just not even going to school. They're in the schools. So I think it's a good question, Stacy. What was my takeaway? My takeaway is we should count our blessings every day. Those of us who live in a home and provide for ourselves and our family. And my takeaway is we can't forget the others that are not in our same situation. I mean, they're not in the same situation because of no reason of their own. They're just as good and hardworking and diligent and moral and ethic as any of us. They just, circumstances in life have been very different. So this is one of the reasons, philanthropy has been such an important part of my life. I never take it for granted that I could be one of those girls in a refugee camp in Greece.
I just have to ask you this, Maria. I know Carlos mentioned you're a part of a play, but have you ever done a documentary? Like, do you have your own documentary out there somewhere that we could all Google?
Oh, you're so funny. No, I recently
No?
started taking a crack at writing something like a memoir. But, because I would like not just for my children and my grandchildren, not to forget the story that is such an important Cuban story, Cuban American story, an American story. But no, there's no document. There
You
has
need to
been
get together with
documentary. I
someone
think
who's
there was a
done
document.
documentaries.
Yeah, there was a documentary done on some of the Peter Pans. In fact, I think ABC did one and did a story many years ago
Yeah,
about the Peter Pan flights and what happened to all these kids.
right. Yeah,
Kids,
your story needs to be recorded somehow, some way, somewhere, besides just the theater part of it, which is great too. Billy, did I miss, was it your parents, your grandparents, or you who came here? Help me out.
No, I was born at a little hospital here in Chicago in Humboldt Park called Norwegian American Hospital. Actually, I'm the chairman of that hospital right now. But no, my parents came from Ciales, Puerto Rico. And let me just say, I think that probably from a young age, what I've learned was the resiliency of our community, and not just our community, but all Latino communities. And I say that because I remember that there was always some type of activism, protests, people like just coming together to get something to happen in our community. I mean, we had to fight for the city of Chicago to finally give us a free health clinic. So it was what I remember from a very young age was that, we lived in these apartments with a whole lot of people and yet we survived. We survived and we went on and we did great things, but it was a struggle for our people. It was like nothing was ever given to us, and not just I'm not just talking when I say these things, I'm just not talking about the Puerto Rican community. I'm talking about our communities, because the only way we've moved forward here in the city of Chicago is by always demanding and being activists, speaking up, and then they pay attention to us. And so, I think that the fact that our communities have been able to speak up and accomplish things, with very little help, from government or from anybody else, I think is what I remember the most. Going to community meetings when you're 5, 6 years old, and all you want to do is play, but your parents are like they're saying, if this is going to get us free government cheese, whatever it's going to do, we're going to be there because our community needs these sorts of things. And so, so those are the sorts of things that I remember the most, is the fact that communities had to fight. Our Latino communities, the Puerto Rican community, we just had to fight for every part of it. And so I would just say that, look, I think it's important for us to support each other, right? As Latinos, we need to support each other. But I also think it's very important for us to keep and preserve our identity and traditions and our history, because our people need to understand that, our kids need to understand that. And so while we could celebrate Latinos being Latino, we need to continue to keep our culture, keep our traditions, keep our history. And at this point, the most important thing is that to show everyone that the Latino vote matters.
How important is that message right now, right? Oh my goodness. I don't want to leave you hanging out there at all, Patricia, because I know you shared kind of your diplomatic journey. Is there anything else you would like to share before we kind of just open it up and like everyone kind of doing their most important points?
No, thank you. I just want to say I really admire the people that are performing this panel. I feel that my story is irrelevant. I came here to study. I've lived here in the States more than I have lived in my home country. But living in New York, one of the things that it was a must that I kind of tried to take to my children or visitors coming to New York was going to Ellis Island, which it was the point of entry of all these immigrants, which it's I think that's what the greatness of this country is all about. A welcoming um, country, and where so many decided to make their homes. And like in Chicago, maybe it was not the first point of entry, but it's you know just sharing and being at Ellis Island, and very different from what we see now and what we live now. So and I'm very grateful on the position that I was for 24 years. Maybe that's why I stayed longer than I intended in government. It was because I was fortunate to be in a position to help my connationals kind of navigate this system. Or it's kind of like you feel you're drowning, but then it's there's a light end of the tunnel. And like Billy said, first, it's one of our I think roles is to make young generations be proud of who they are, where they come from, and from our language, our traditions, and to keep it to keep going, on that pathway. It's and to embrace, the all the different communities that we are able, without traveling, to experience in a city of Chicago, and embrace those differences. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity that I had as a government official. I hope that this is not going to become to an end, but make it wider with as a board member of Centro Romero, and as a member of other organizations that I would like to get involved into helping immigrants navigate these kind of legal trouble, and unfortunately immigration comes up during elections, but it's kind of forgotten. It's not like black and white. It's mostly a gray area. Hopefully we can make and make this change, give more certainty to younger generations, to know what is it, the pathway that they have to follow to accomplish either citizenship or just a regular status in the United States. And it's very important, like Maria, it's to document these stories. Because as a consul general, I have to say that it's not only what you need to know, the technical things, but the compassion and the humanity that you need to bring to these positions. It can be sometimes very frustrating that you can do so much, but it's so necessary that the governments look for the right person to put in the position, especially with immigrant communities. I've had the privilege of working with really fine, diplomats that bring that humanity and the compassion to these jobs, which is very much needed.
Right. Well, we are, I'm looking, let me just give me a minute here to look at my clock. 2:54 is our time. And we don't have to go in the round robin way we've been going. I mean, kind of a free for all. I just want to make sure that all of you share what you really want the people who are out there watching to know about the community, to know about our contribution, or anything else you want. So I'm just going to open it up and say, go for it.
You know what I
And that's
would,
what,
Billy had touched on it, but we are part of a group of countries, cultures, Latin America, amazing. Every place in Latin America, every country has an amazing, amazing culture individually. So the key is, how do we work together, but keep that special individuality that each has. That's the win-win situation. Europe does it very well, and Asia does it very well. So we need to do the same thing. How do we support one another, help each other out, but at the same time preserve that individual magic that each of these cultural places have, because they're all amazing, amazing cultures. Thank you.
I would just like to add, it's, we messengers of let's get involved, not say like, that's not my problem. I'm beyond that. I'm an American citizen, but we always have to get involved and not like turn our backs. If we something that is not right, and it's anything that we can get involved with, it really counts and it makes a difference. Thank you.
Yeah, as someone who's been involved in philanthropy for a very long time, I always say we Latinos have a long history of philanthropy. We help our families, right? We help our neighbors, we help our friends. And I think that people like Billy Ocasio and Carlos Tortolero have given us now, as members of this incredibly rich community, the opportunity to invest in the future of these great institutions. And that's where philanthropy comes in. Philanthropy is people gathering together and supporting an organization, an institution that is doing good work. And I think that there is that history in the Latino community. We just have to harness it and channel it in the direction of all the wonderful nonprofits and cultural institutions in Chicago, whether the services teaching us about how to appreciate something beautiful in our culture, or teaching a child how to read, or after school programs, or providing senior citizens with the service they need. Our community is not unlike any other community that has come to the United States that creates its own institutions to take care of their own. As Billy said, we're very resilient, and we have proven that we are. I think it's important, Stacy, to also mention that Latinos are the largest minority in Chicago, right? We're almost 30%. We have leaders in all areas of the community, from the philanthropy, business, clearly elected officials. And again, we're not like any other immigrant community that has come to the United States and have said, we're here to work and we're here to make a contribution. And we have done that. And now more than half of the Latinos live outside the city of Chicago. So you have cities like Aurora and Elgin with over 40% of Latinos in those communities. So we are not any different than previous immigrant groups. We're here to stay. We're here to work hard and make a contribution.
And let me just thank you for that, Maria, because what you said is actually so true. It's so true. We all came here getting away from something. We all came here, to work. We came here for a better way of life, and even to find a new way of life. Because I know Puerto Rico, and we are, we used to have such a great agricultural country. And we developed all these things, but you had all these big conglomerates come in and take over, and so our people were left with no jobs and needed to go somewhere to provide for their families. And so we came here, and we came here to work, and we came here to provide a service. And so I think that all of our communities have done that, and I'm just like really so proud, and I can't wait for people that are not Latinos to find out who the Latinos are.
And all I got to say about that is what a representation we have here from all of you, because it has been just wonderful hearing all of your stories, hearing all of our contributions. And I know we're rounding out with our last 30 seconds here, but I just want to take a minute to thank each and every one of you, Carlos, Maria, Patricia, Billy, all of your stories, and just sharing what you know. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you, Stacy. It was a pleasure to be with you and the rest of my friends. Thank you.
Thank you so much.